Just this once, Meredith. Please. Cashin's voice came through my phone smooth as glass and twice as slick, one of those practiced tones that make strangers want to believe him and family want to set their wallet on fire. I pinched the bridge of my nose and looked past the glow of my dual monitors to the late afternoon skyline outside my Denver office. Snow still clung to the Rockies like chalk dust, and the spreadsheets open on my screen bled orderly columns of numbers. Cash flow forecasts, project milestones, vendor payouts. Numbers I could trust. Cashin, I said, keeping my voice even, what you're asking is not small. It's 50, he said quickly, as if speed would make it less offensive. 50. You make that in a quarter. It's bridging capital, not charity. $50,000 is not bridging capital, I said. For most people, it's a year of their life. He breathed out through his nose a performative sigh. You're not most people, Meredith. You're Lockwood Money and Eleanor's favorite. You've got a trust fund parked in neutral while opportunity rolls by. Eleanor. Great-aunt Eleanor Navarro, who taught 7th grade civics in Española for 41 years, drove a sun-baked Corolla, wore the same silver bracelets every day, and left me and my cousin equal shares of a nest egg I still couldn't picture without picturing her hands counting out coupons at a kitchen table. Money that took her a lifetime to love into existence. Money Cashin had devoured in 18 months. What's the opportunity? I asked, because I'm a project manager by trade and a masochist by personality apparently. He brightened. Short-term stake in a distressed boutique motel outside Sedona. Retro mid-century bones, mountain views, ready-made for influencer retreats. A friend of mine has an inside line on the sale. We renovate, we rebrand, we print money. I just need to show proof of funds to lock the contract. And the bank. They're reviewing, he said, the air quotes audible. You know how slow institutions are. This is time-sensitive. I rolled back in my chair, letting the wheels creak, a warning to no one. Who's the friend? Silence. Then, you don't know him. Then why would I send you $50,000 to impress him? Because we're family, he said, a blade wrapped in velvet. Because Aunt Ellie wanted us to take care of each other. Because your money is sitting there getting lazy while mine is out here working. Your money, I said, bought a Ducati you dropped in the Trader Joe's parking lot and 2 startups that were Instagram accounts with business plans stapled to them. His laugh turned sharp. God, you love to keep score. No, I said, I love to keep ledgers. There's a difference. He pivoted, as Cashin always did, to pathos. Unia's parents are coming out next month. I told them I had something big in motion. Her dad's an anesthesiologist. He thinks I'm underambitious. A bitter smile in his voice. I need this to land. But there was not a motel. An audience. Cass, I said, softening because I always did, you don't build a life on flash paper. If Unia's dad needs a pitch deck to respect you, that's on him. If you need him to, that's on you. It's not on me. You're unbelievable. What did you expect me to say? I expected you to pick up the phone like blood matters, he snapped, dropping the charm. I expected you to remember who helped you move into that shoebox in Capitol Hill when you were 22. You dented my dresser and stole the security deposit. And to stop acting like CFO of the family. Then stop treating me like one, I said. And stop using Aunt Eleanor's name to launder your desires. He was quiet so long I thought the call had dropped. I watched a tiny skier carve a slow line down a distant slope until they became a dot I could have erased with my thumbnail. When he spoke again, his voice had cooled into something congealed. You've changed. I grew up. No, he said. You learned how to say no, and decided it made you holy. Is that what this is? Confession. I stood without meaning to, the words pushing me up out of my chair. Cashin, listen. I have helped you. More times than I should have. I paid off your Amex when they froze it last spring. I sent you rent twice. I covered the ER copay when you broke your wrist jumping a curb on that electric skateboard you swore was a business expense. That was transportation. It was stupidity. I heard my voice harden and didn't like it but didn't stop. I'm done underwriting your experiments. If the motel is real, get a bridge loan like an adult. If the friend is real, he'll understand due diligence. If neither is, then you just saved us both $50,000. I could feel him smiling without teeth. You always did love to give speeches. Then here's the last line. The answer is no. Another breathy laugh, but this one was colder. Fine. Keep your money. Keep your ledgers. But when this bites you, and it will, you don't get to call me. He leaned into the syllables, letting each one settle. You don't get family. The line clicked dead. For a few seconds I stood holding the phone like it was heavier than before. The office around me hummed its usual end-of-day drone. The HVAC exhaling, a printer shuttling pages, someone down the hall cursing at a stuck zipper on a winter coat. Normal sounds in a normal life. And yet something in me had registered a tremor. I set the phone on the desk and tried to breathe through it. This wasn't the first time Cashin had tried to make urgency my problem. It wouldn't be the last. Boundaries are uneventful until they aren't. My screensaver went black, reflecting a tired version of me in the glass. Ponytail loosening, mascara smudged from the snow that had caught my lashes on the walk from the parking garage. 34 Operations Director at Highlark Labs, with a team that trusted me and a calendar that could kill a horse. No one looking at me would think I was easy prey. The phone buzzed again, a text from a contact labeled Mom. I didn't need to open it to predict the shape of it. I opened it anyway. Mom. Cass reached out because he's trying. Family supports family, Meredith. Your great-aunt would be heartbroken to see you so cold. There was, the ancestry weaponized. I typed and deleted 3 replies, each one an argument I'd already had. I settled on, I'm not cold. I'm careful. I didn't send it. Another buzz. A second text, this one from my father who rarely entered the ring. Dad, maybe you can loan it and we'll make sure he pays you back. We'll talk Sunday? I locked the phone and pressed it face down into the blotter, as if it might stop vibrating with expectations. Hey Lockwood. Naomi's voice came from the doorway, gentle, amused. She leaned her shoulder into the frame, a paper cup in hand. Naomi Rajan, our senior designer, my office neighbor, my friend. You look like you just swallowed a staple. Cousin Economics, I said. Ah. She handed me the coffee without asking. On the house. You need the kind that peels paint. I took a sip. It was scalding and perfect. He wants 50 grand for a motel he hasn't seen with a partner I haven't heard of and a plan that fits on the back of a receipt. Naomi's eyebrows rose. And you said no. And now I'm a traitor to bloodlines. She sat on the edge of my desk, careful to avoid the neat stacks. Want advice or just want me to make the sympathetic face? Advice, I said, surprising myself. He thought for a beat. Nothing you say will be heard while the ask is active. People in ask mode can't process the word, no, as anything but a temporary obstruction. They're like cats in front of a closed door. They yowl until someone bleeds. So you have to hold the line until the yowling stops. And after, then you say the same thing again but slower. He tipped her head. Do you trust him? Yes, I said automatically. Then, not with money. Then you have your answer. You can love a person and decline their invoice. She slid off the desk. Also, have you looked at Eleanor's trust docs recently? Might be worth reminding yourself why she structured it the way she did. I nodded and it felt like an action plan. Work the plan. I could do plans. By the time I made it home to my condo in Lohi, the sky had gone navy and the sidewalks were a patchwork of ice and boot salt. I hung my coat by the door, kicked my shoes into the tray and stood in my living room long enough to hear the quiet. I don't notice quiet until it's crowded with thoughts. I went to the hall closet and tugged down the fireproof lockbox I keep for documents that my life would lurch without. Passport, car title, the letter Aunt Eleanor wrote me in her looping blue ink the spring before she died. The trust packet was there too, thick with tabs and stickies I'd added years ago. Back when grief made me compulsive and the idea of stewards and beneficiaries felt like a foreign language you could learn if you just read enough. I carried it to the kitchen table and spread it out, letting the papers breathe. Eleanor's lawyer, Marilyn Cho Santa Fe, edges like a steel ruler, had drafted everything in plainer language than most attorneys bothered with. She'd included letters from Eleanor alongside the legalese, little anchors to keep the numbers from floating off into abstraction. I didn't intend to read it all. I intended to glance, to reassure myself that the structure I'd respected for 5 years still respected me. But words have their own gravity and I found myself tracing sentences with my finger the way I had when these pages were new. One paragraph caught my eye because of the underlines I'd left there. 2 parallel lines might tell for read twice. It was an unusual clause, something Marilyn had explained as belt and suspenders language. If any beneficiary attempted to coerce, defraud, or unduly influence the other regarding distribution or control of trust assets, the attempting party forfeited any remaining claim. A safeguard you draft when you know your family. A safeguard you pray you never need. I sat back. The room seemed to tilt a few degrees, not dangerously, just enough to notice. I took a photo of that page with my phone, not because I planned to wield it like a weapon but because sometimes memory needs a receipt. On the counter my phone lit up again. New message from Mom. I let it sit until the screen dimmed. The clause pulsed in my head not as a threat, but as a boundary I didn't have to invent alone. Eleanor had drawn it for me in ink I could still see. I closed the lockbox and slid it back into the closet. I reheated leftover pozole from the freezer and ate it standing up, scrolling my inbox until I found an email thread from Catherine Walsh and Keene Real Property, the attorney who'd handled my condo closing 2 years ago. Catherine was brisk and dry and allergic to drama. Exactly the kind of person you want between you and a piece of paper with consequences. I drafted a new email 3 times without sending it. Hi Catherine, quick question, hypothetical. No. Catherine, hope you're well. If a cousin asks for. No. Catherine, what's the legal definition of undue influence if the person thinks they're charming? Definitely no. I closed my laptop and turned on the lamp by the couch, the one that makes my living room look like a magazine spread in which no one lives. The quiet settled again. Outside someone laughed on the sidewalk. A car door slammed. Life kept happening like it had a schedule I wasn't invited to edit. I told myself I was fine. I told myself this was an ordinary ask, an ordinary refusal, an ordinary ripple across a calm surface. I told myself there was nothing to do tonight but brush my teeth and set my alarm and get up tomorrow and go run the numbers on a geothermal bid that had nothing to do with Cashin Hargrove and his boutique motel. I believed myself for almost an hour. Then the phone lit up again, not with a text this time, but with an invitation that looked innocent enough to anyone who'd never grown up in a family where gatherings were sometimes staging grounds. A dinner. A private room. A date that made me blink. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. And even as I typed a polite reply, because it would have been rude not to, because I am never rude, because rudeness is its own kind of surrender, I felt that small, precise chill return, the one I hadn't been able to name in my office when the mountains looked like chalk. It slid into place like a key. I had no way of knowing then, standing barefoot in my kitchen with the taste of chili and lime still on my tongue, that I had just stepped onto a path that someone else had measured for me. And that the first door on that path, the one I was about to open with a smile, wasn't a welcome at all. I didn't sleep much after that call. Morning came the way it always does here, thin gold light threading itself through the blinds, the city starting up like a big old truck, coughing and rumbling, pretending it wasn't freezing. I ran because running is how I file the parts of my life that don't want to be filed. 5 miles along the South Platte, breath like steam, the path salted but still slick in the shadowed bends. My watch buzzed at the turnaround. I ignored it because pacing only tells you what your legs are doing, not your head. By the time I got back, my inbox had organized overnight into the usual chaos. Vendor delays. A geotechnical report flagged interesting anomalies, which is engineer speak for, your budget is about to weep. Naomi had sent a link to a color study for our Mesa Ridge project with the subject line you versus the palette she told you not to worry about. Normal life stacking itself politely, daring me to pretend the night before hadn't happened. Sometimes the most dangerous traps are the ones that let you keep your routine. If you'd met me at 21 you'd think none of this fit. I was the girl in the back row who knew every answer and never raised her hand. Aunt Eleanor used to say I collected competence like other kids collected stickers. She meant it kindly. She worked in a low-slung middle school in Espanola, the kind built in the 70s with hallways you could get lost in even if you tried to get found. When my parents were working double shifts, Mom at the hospital, Dad flying medevac, Aunt Eleanor would pick me up for long weekends that smelled like Windex and green chili. She had one television, rabbit ears wrapped in foil, and she'd mute Jeopardy! And make me answer the clues before the contestants did. Not to win, she'd say, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon that had burn marks like rings on a tree, but to practice being sure. She never had kids of her own. I didn't know if that was by choice, I still don't. But she had a way of making me feel like I was exactly the right size for the world I was in, not too much, not too little. When she died, an aneurysm quick as a light switch, that right-sized feeling cracked. The trust wasn't a windfall to me, it was a tether. A promise that the part of my life with her in it didn't end just because the part with her body did. Cashin called it seed money. I called it ballast. Cashin Hargrove, my mother's sister's son, grew up 2 states and a galaxy away from me in Scottsdale, where the cul-de-sacs are named after trees that wouldn't survive there without a prayer and a sprinkler system. His father is a man who makes people say he's in development, and never specify whether that means property or personality. His mother, Aunt Mara, could make a bake sale look like a board meeting and a board meeting look like a bake sale. He's there only, the kind of only that absorbs every light source in a room and calls it daylight. We were summer cousins, then college cousins, then, hey, you live a day's drive from me now, cousins. He's warm. He's funny. He remembers birthdays and the names of your coworkers' dogs. And when he wants something, the room tilts toward it like it was built with a slope. People like to tell you that enablers don't know they're enabling. Maybe that's true for strangers. Family knows. Family knows and does it anyway because it's faster than fighting and easier than watching. My mother would call me after Cashin's latest pivot and say, "He's figuring it out, Meredith. Not everyone learns in straight lines." My father would say nothing until a bill came due and then send me a half-hearted text about helping where we can. If I sounded frustrated, Mom would bring out the heirloom phrases, the ones with weight. We take care of our own. Your great-aunt believed in him too. Don't be so rigid. That last one always landed. Rigidity is the sin assigned to girls who don't bend into usefulness. I'm not pretending I was innocent. I wrote checks. Not a lot, not compared to what he burned, but enough to train the problem to come to my door. The first time was harmless on paper. He'd moved to Phoenix after a stint in Austin that ended with roommates, plural, and a security deposit that vanished into the kind of account that doesn't send receipts. I just need to bridge this month, he'd said, and I'd bridged it because bridges are what you build to get from here to there. Then came the credit card freeze. He had a cash flow hiccup, such a cute euphemism for consequences. Then the ER copay after the skateboard incident, which he called a microfracture, like micro made it thrifty. Each time I told myself I was buying peace, not creating expectation. Each time I told myself it was the last. Lasts don't announce themselves. They let you declare them and then wait to be proven wrong. Work kept me honest. I started as a junior PM, counting rebar and chasing signatures, at a firm in Flagstaff that did good things the slow way. Sustainable builds for schools and clinics in places people only remembered during election seasons. I moved to Denver for High Lark when they lured me with 2 words that get me like no others: autonomy and resources. We're not a giant. We're simply big enough to take a punch and small enough to dodge one. I love my job in the way that makes people uncomfortable, like it's a person I chose on purpose, not a situation I defaulted into. Work doesn't love you back, true. But it rewards clarity in a way people sometimes don't. Naomi likes to say I speak in bullet points without writing them down. You could host a PowerPoint in a power outage, she once told me, and it wasn't not a compliment. She does color like it's a language, and together we turn promises into buildings that don't apologize for existing. It's a good partnership. It's also the place where the rest of my life sits in a neat row while I pretend all the messy parts are just drafts I haven't finalized. After the run, after the coffee, after the first round of meetings where my brain did the skipping record thing it does when it's trying not to think about the thing, I opened the lockbox again. Not because I needed to read the clause a second time, but because touching the pages made them true. The forfeiture language was clear, not the kind of legalese that hides a trap under velvet. Any attempt to coerce, defraud, or unduly influence the other beneficiary regarding distribution or control of trust assets shall result in forfeiture of the attempting party's remaining interest. I'd underlined coerce and unduly influence with a pen that had bled through. At 29 that felt like melodrama. At 34 it looked like foresight. Lockwood. Naomi leaned in again, slid a to-go box across my desk. Protein and penne. I saw your calendar and decided to keep you from eating trail mix for lunch like a raccoon in dry bar. You are my favorite coworker, I said, popping the lid. Don't tell HR. He grinned. You can buy my silence for the low price of answering one personal question. Pass, I said automatically, then softened. Ask. Is Cashin the kind of cousin who apologizes with cupcakes and a real apology, or the kind who apologizes with a grand gesture he will later invoice you for? I speared a piece of chicken. The latter if history is predictive. Then expect a grand gesture, she said. And look at it sideways when it arrives. I wanted to insist there would be no gesture. I wanted to insist that no was a period, not a comma. Instead, I nodded. Because sometimes the smartest thing in the room is the part of you that remembers what you've already learned. My mother called that evening. I let it ring out and then called her back because I wasn't raised by monsters. She answered on the first half ring, the way she does when she's been poised over the phone waiting for you to do the right thing so she doesn't have to tell you the right thing. "Hi, honey," she said, cheer turned down to a low simmer. "How was your day?" "Full." "Good full or bad full?" "Work full," I said. "You called earlier?" "I did." A pause as if she were choosing a spice. "I spoke to Cass this morning. He thinks you misunderstood him." "I understood him. He says it's an investment, not a handout. Bridge loans exist. He says the bank is being slow. Banks exist to be slow. It's how they stay banks." She sighed, a heavier sound than Cashin's performative one. "You know, I don't like being in the middle." "You're not in the middle." "I am when my sister calls me crying," she said, efficient as a stitch. "Mara says Unia's parents are old school. She says Cass wants to show he can build something. He can build something that isn't mine." "Meredith," she said, and in my name I heard my age drop by a decade. "Aunt Eleanor adored you, but she didn't leave you that money to sit in a vault. She left it so you could live a life with margin, and maybe make sure your family had some too. She left it so we wouldn't have to mortgage our futures to other people's mistakes," I said. "Including our own." Silence. Then softly, "You sound like her." It landed warm and dangerous. Compliments can be crowbars. "I'll call you Sunday," I said. "I have to get to a dinner." "Who with?" "Work." I lied because I didn't know what it was yet, and naming a thing before you understand it binds you to the wrong version of it. After we hung up, I checked my phone again. The invitation from earlier glowed like it had learned how to dare. "Unia and Cashin would like to take you to dinner to celebrate your birthday early. Private room, the Bellwether, Saturday, 7 p.m. My birthday was 3 weeks out. The Bellwether was one of those Denver staples that locals resent a little and still recommend to visiting aunts because the steaks are perfect and the booths feel like confessions. There was a note below the details. "Just family, can't wait to toast you." Unia had always been kind to me. She's the sort of person who brings a plant instead of flowers and remembers to ask if you have a south-facing window. She works in user research, the science of why people tap the wrong thing, and she looks at the world like it's a puzzle we could solve if we had the right post-its. If this was a trap, she was either a piece of it or a cover for it. Neither felt good to contemplate. Both felt necessary. I texted Naomi a screenshot. "Me, this is either sweet or strategic." Naomi, "Por qué no los dos?" Me, "I can't tell if that's comfort or a warning." Naomi, "Yes. I RSVP'd yes because that is who I am. The person who shows up when asked, the person who believes in the possibility of straightforwardness even when the world has taken a Sharpa to the map. Also because you can't call a thing an ambush until you've walked into the room where the chairs are arranged." That night I pulled out Eleanor's letter, the one she wrote in blue ink on paper with a rose pressed into the corner. It wasn't a will, it was a wish. "You have a good head for numbers," she wrote, "but what I admire is your head for people. Use both. Don't let anyone, especially the people you love, make you small. Money is a magnifying glass. It makes big things bigger and small things look like monsters. Pay attention to what it's magnifying in you." She signed it Ellie because she signed everything Ellie, even checks. It made bankers sigh. I read it twice. I folded it on the same creases and slid it back in its envelope. Then I did a thing I'm not proud of. I googled the Bellwether private dining room like I could find an article titled "How to Survive Your Cousin's Velvet Ambush." Photos came up, mahogany table, a decanter that had probably seen worse nights, lighting at that flattering level where everyone thinks they're honest. It looked like the kind of room where men have made decisions about other people's lives since wood-paneled rooms were invented. I closed the tab. Some research only reassures the part of you that already knows. Before bed, I replied to my father's text from the day before. "Me, will talk Sunday." "Okay. Love you." 3 dots appeared, then vanished. Then, "Dad, love you, kiddo." I slept like paper in a breeze. Quiet until you touched me, then all rustle. Dreams nipped at my heels and dissolved when I turned to look at them. In the morning, the city was gray and bright at once, that high-altitude optical illusion Colorado specializes in. I made coffee I didn't drink and stood at the window, watching a dog in a sweater try to negotiate with a patch of ice. The dog won. I took it as a sign I didn't believe in. If you asked me, I'd tell you I am rational, not superstitious. That I trust patterns and clauses and people who sign their real names on real lines. And yet, as I pulled on a blazer and checked for the third time that my phone had a full charge, I felt like someone who was about to take a test in a subject she aced and still feared. That's the thing about family exams. They're never graded on a curve. They're graded on the stories people want to keep telling. I told myself I was going to dinner. I told myself it was a toast. I told myself that if anything bent sideways, I knew how to stand up straight. I told myself because it was easier than admitting the truth that had been tapping on my shoulder since Cashin's last word the night before. There would be more than a toast waiting for me at the bellwether. And whatever it was, it had already been printed. The week leading up to Saturday felt like trying to ignore a splinter. You can function, but you're aware of it with every move. High Lark Labs was in the thick of closing a contract with a biotech startup out of Boulder. And the days should have been swallowed by budgets, vendor schedules, and the endless back and forth over whether the client's vision aligned with gravity and physics. And yet, even in meetings, my mind would drift back to that private room dinner. Cashin had gone quiet, which was not his style. His silences were usually weapons, brief and strategic, like he was reloading before another volley. But this one stretched on. No texts, no late night just checking in calls, no social media posts of artisanal cocktails tagged at places I knew he couldn't afford. It wasn't absence, it was rehearsal. Naomi noticed first. "You're distracted," she said Thursday afternoon as we reviewed design boards in the project room. "I'm multitasking. You're thinking about whatever happens Saturday." I glanced up from the renderings. "I'm thinking about HVAC placement." She gave me the kind of look you give a child who insists they're not tired while swaying on their feet. "Right. And the HVAC is wearing a tailored suit and buying you dinner." I smirked despite myself. "It's probably nothing." "Probably is a useless word," she said. "It's the Switzerland of probability. No one trusts it." I didn't respond. Because the truth was, I'd already decided it wasn't nothing. The invitation was too curated. Unia was too precise to pick a place like the bellwether without a reason. Cashin didn't operate in coincidence. Friday night my mother called again. "Hi, sweetheart," she began, her tone overly bright. "You all set for tomorrow?" "That depends on what tomorrow is." "A nice dinner with family," she said, feigning innocence so poorly it was almost insulting. "Cashin really wants to mend fences. He said he's planning something special for you." I let the words sit for a beat. "Did he tell you what?" She hesitated. "Just that it's important to him. And that you should keep an open mind." There was the script. Keep an open mind. Which really meant lower your defenses so you're easier to move into position. "Mom," I said, "I'm coming because Unia invited me. But if Cashin tries to turn this into another conversation about money, I'm walking out." Her silence on the other end was a tiny, involuntary flinch. Then she softened her voice. "Honey, I just want us all to get along. That's what your great-aunt would have wanted." I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. Aunt Eleanor also wanted us to respect each other's boundaries. That works both ways. Saturday morning came gray and thin-skied, the kind of winter day that looks like it's holding its breath. I cleaned my condo more than it needed. A displacement activity, the illusion of control. My phone stayed unnervingly quiet. Round 4 Naomi texted. "Naomi, remember cats and closed doors." Me copy that. No door gets opened without me knowing what's on the other side. Naomi or who? I chose a navy blazer, a silk blouse, dark slacks. Professional armor, not hostile but not casual enough to be read as unprepared. I wasn't going to war exactly. But I wanted to look like someone who took notes and remembered dates. The bellwether was glowing in the early dark when I arrived, the warm light from the windows pooling onto the sidewalk like honey. Inside, the hostess greeted me with practiced warmth. "Miss Lockwood? Your party's already here." Already here. On time wasn't Cashin's style either. He was a late arrival kind of man. Someone who liked to make an entrance and let the room shift toward him. Him being early meant the performance had already begun. The hostess led me past the main dining room, down a short hall to a heavy paneled door. My pulse was an audible thing in my ears. She opened the door. The private dining room was larger than I expected, with a long mahogany table set for 9. At one end sat Unia, my parents, Aunt Mara, and Cashin. The rest of the seats were occupied by 4 men in expensive suits I didn't recognize. No menus. No drinks. Just neat stacks of papers in front of each suited man. Cashin stood, smiling a little too brightly. "Meredith, you made it." I stayed just inside the doorway. "What is this?" "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "We've got some things to go over." I didn't move. My gaze swept the table again. The posture of the suited men, the way Unia's eyes wouldn't quite meet mine, the unreadable look on my father's face. Something in my chest went cold. I had walked in expecting dinner. What I'd walked into was a stage already set. And I knew, deep in the bone-deep way you know the ground is uneven before you trip, that whatever was about to happen had been rehearsed without me. I didn't sit. From the threshold, the air in the private dining room felt heavier than it had a right to be. Not hot, not cold, just weighted like it had been filled with intent. Cashin's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Meredith, come on. We're all here for you." I glanced toward Unia. She was clasping her hands so tightly her knuckles blanched. My parents were both looking at me with identical brittle smiles that I'd seen them wear at funerals where they didn't know the deceased well enough to mourn. The 4 suited men turned their attention toward me in unison. One of them, a tall man with sandy hair and a jaw you could use as a paperweight, stood and extended his hand. "Ms. Lockwood," he said, "I'm Daniel Halvorson, counsel for the Hargrove family. We'd like to discuss some urgent matters regarding your late great-aunt's estate." Counsel for the Hargrove family. Not my family. Not our family. Just theirs. I didn't shake his hand. "That's interesting," I said. Because I didn't know the Hargrove family retained counsel for my inheritance. One of the other men, rounder in the face and wearing wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "There have been some developments that require your cooperation to resolve." Developments? I stayed where I was, still not crossing the invisible line between the hall and the table. I thought I was here for an early birthday dinner. Cashin laughed lightly, but it had the wrong pitch. "We are celebrating you. This is part of it. Clearing the air. Starting fresh." My mother's voice came in, low and soothing. "Honey, just sit down. They've prepared all the documents so it'll be quick." Documents. My eyes flicked to the stacks of paper in front of the men. From where I stood, I could make out bold headers. Petition for conservatorship, transfer of financial authority, waiver of contest. And there was. The chill I'd felt all week solidified into something sharp. I took one step into the room, not toward the table but toward the far wall where I could see all of them at once. Why would there be a conservatorship petition with my name on it? The sandy-haired man, Halvorson, folded his hands. "Ms. Lockwood, there are concerns about your financial management of your trust assets. Your cousin has documented patterns of spending that suggest risk to the family legacy." My laugh came out sharper than I intended. Patterns? Like paying my bills on time? Like maintaining a credit score over 800? Like not burning through an entire trust in under 2 years? Cashin's mask slipped just enough to show irritation. "You bought a luxury car last year. You've taken multiple trips to Europe. You're spending like the money has no bottom." I blinked at him. "A certified pre-owned sedan I got after my 10-year-old Civic died. One trip to Italy I saved for over 2 years. Those are your exhibits." Wire-rimmed glasses cleared his throat. "Regardless of your perspective, the concern is significant enough that the family feels it's in everyone's best interest for your assets to be professionally managed. You'd receive a generous monthly stipend." "A generous allowance," I cut in. "From my own inheritance. Managed by?" Halvorson smiled thinly. "Kelwin Financial Services. A reputable firm with experience in family wealth preservation." The name landed like a stone in a still pond. I remembered seeing it in some business registry search months ago while looking up a property developer Cashin had mentioned. "Reputable," I repeated slowly. "Tell me, does Kelwin Financial happen to list Cashin Hargrove as an executive?" No one answered. My father shifted in his seat. Unia stared at her lap. I moved closer to the table now, not to sit but to pick up the top page from the nearest stack. The legalese was dense, but not dense enough to hide what it was. An irrevocable transfer of authority over my trust to Kelwin Financial, with a clause allowing emergency disbursements to family members at the discretion of the managing executive. Cashin's executive discretion. I set the paper back down. You want me to sign away control of my inheritance to a company you own, under the pretense that I can't be trusted with it. That's not family concern. That's theft dressed up in a suit. Halvorson's smile didn't falter. Ms. Lockwood, I'd caution you to watch your language. Accusations of theft are accurate when someone is stealing, I said, locking eyes with him. Cashin leaned forward now, dropping the pretense. Meredith, stop making this harder than it needs to be. Just sign the papers. You walk away with no drama and we all move on. I straightened, the weight of Aunt Eleanor's claws pressing into my mind like a hand between my shoulder blades. No drama, I said. You brought 4 lawyers to ambush me in a restaurant. That's your idea of no drama. For the first time the room's confidence wavered. I could feel it in the subtle shift of posture, the slight drop in volume. They'd expected resistance, but not this kind. Not someone who recognized the set before the play even started. I smiled then, not warmly but in a way that said I'd just remembered something important. Before I sign anything, I said, pulling out my phone, I want my attorney to take a look. Cashin's face paled a fraction. That's not necessary. That's exactly necessary. I was already scrolling to Catherine Walsh's number. And unless someone here can show me their bar association credentials, we'll wait to see if she agrees you're as reputable as you say. For the first time all evening no one spoke. And in that silence I realized I'd just shifted the balance in the room. The silence in the room wasn't just awkward. It was fracturing. You could almost hear the confidence leak out like air from a tire. Cashin tried to plug it. Meredith, don't be dramatic. These are legitimate attorneys. This is a legitimate process. Perfect, I said, keeping my tone as level as a plumb line. Then you won't mind if my lawyer verifies it. I pressed call on Catherine Walsh's number and lifted the phone to my ear. She picked up on the second ring, her voice crisp as fresh paper. Meredith. Saturday evening. This must be urgent. You could say that, I said, watching Cashin shift in his seat. I'm at the Bellwether in their private dining room. My cousin and 4 men claiming to be attorneys have presented me with documents to sign over control of my trust. I'd like you to come review them. There was a beat of silence on her end. Do not sign anything. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up. Cashin's jaw tightened. You just made this a lot messier than it needed to be. What you needed, I said, was me alone in this room without backup. That's not happening. Halvorson stood, his expression still carefully neutral. Ms. Lockwood, there's no reason to involve outside counsel. It will only complicate. Good, I cut in. Complication is exactly what I'm going for. My father tried for diplomacy. Sweetheart, maybe we should just hear them out. We're past hearing, I said. This is a signing or not signing situation. And I'm in the not signing camp until my attorney says otherwise. Unia's hands were still folded, but now her fingers were moving, rubbing against each other as if she were trying to polish the truth out of them. She looked up at me for the first time since I'd entered. There was something in her eyes that almost looked like relief. The next 20 minutes stretched like taffy. No one ate, no one drank. The papers sat in their neat, accusing stacks. Cashin checked his phone so often it was like a nervous tick. Halvorson murmured with the others in low tones. My mother alternated between sending me pleading glances and pointedly ignoring me. When the door finally opened, it was like oxygen flooding back into the room. Catherine Walsh stepped in, wearing a tailored charcoal coat over a slate dress, her hair pulled back in the no-nonsense knot that had intimidated a mortgage underwriter into approving my condo in 2 days flat. Good evening, she said, scanning the table. I'm attorney Catherine Walsh. I understand there are documents for my client to review. Halvorson hesitated, then slid the stack toward her. Of course. She pulled a pair of slim reading glasses from her bag, sat, and began leafing through the pages with the kind of precision that made every eye in the room track her movements. No one interrupted. 5 minutes in, her brows knit. By page 10 she set the papers down and looked up at the 4 suited men. Gentlemen, may I see your bar association credentials, please? The silence was immediate and absolute. Halvorson cleared his throat. We don't carry physical. Then your bar numbers will suffice, Catherine said. Her voice didn't rise, but it gained an edge you could cut fabric with. More silence. The men exchanged glances. I thought so, she said finally. Meredith, these men are not licensed attorneys in the state of Colorado, or any state as far as I can verify from the names on these documents. And speaking of the documents, they are riddled with irregularities. The conservatorship language is overly broad, lacks judicial oversight, and violates multiple fiduciary statutes. The signatures don't even match the printed names in several places. The shift in the room was seismic. My mother looked from Catherine to Cashin, confusion tightening into something darker. My father's hands, folded on the table, slowly unlinked. Cashin, Catherine continued, her gaze locking on him now, this is not a misunderstanding. This is an attempted fraud, using forged legal documents and impersonation of legal professionals. That's a felony. Multiple felonies. Unia's face went white. Cashin opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Now, Catherine said, pulling her phone from her bag, I've already contacted the Denver Police Department. They should be here shortly. Halvorsen, or whatever his name really was, rose from his chair. We'll be leaving now. I wouldn't recommend it, Catherine said without looking up from her phone. Leaving before law enforcement arrives will only add to the charges. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made every head turn. 2 uniformed officers entered the room, their presence snapping the last threads of Cashin's composure. The fake attorneys shifted, eyes darting toward the door like cornered animals. One of the officers addressed Catherine. We got your call, ma'am. You the reporting party? I am, she said, standing to hand over the documents. This is my client, Meredith Lockwood. She was lured here under false pretenses and presented with fraudulent paperwork by individuals impersonating attorneys. The primary orchestrator is her cousin, Cashin Hargrove. Cashin flinched at the sound of his name in that context. My mother's lips parted as if to speak, but she closed them again. The officer began taking statements, starting with Catherine and me. The other moved toward the suited men, who suddenly seemed much smaller without their posturing. I stood there, my heart still thudding, watching the performance collapse under the weight of reality. Cashin sat back in his chair, jaw tight, eyes calculating in a way I knew too well. But whatever he was planning now, it wouldn't be in this room. Because for the first time in years, the narrative wasn't his to control. The Bellwether's private dining room was never meant for this kind of scene. It was designed for corporate deals and birthday toasts, not the slow public dismantling of a family member's scheme. But here we were. The officer nearest the suited men pulled out a small notebook. Names, please. Full legal names. Halvorsen hesitated just a beat too long before answering. Daniel Harrison. Catherine's head snapped up. Interesting. The paperwork you handed me says Daniel Halvorsen. The officer's pen paused mid-scratch. Sir, which is it? Halvorsen's jaw worked, but nothing came out. The man in wire rims leaned forward. Look, this is a misunderstanding. We're not. You're not attorneys, Catherine cut in, and you're not even consistent in your aliases. Officer, these men are actors. They were hired by Mr. Hargrove to impersonate legal professionals and intimidate my client into signing over her trust. The officer shifted his gaze to Cashin. Is that true? Cashin gave a humorless laugh. They knew it was a dramatization. No, Unia's voice cut through the room, clear and sharp. Every head turned toward her. Her hands were still clasped, but her shoulders were squared now. I didn't know. Meredith didn't know. This is the first I'm hearing about them being hired actors. Cashin's eyes flicked to her, quick and warning, but Unia didn't look away. I thought this was a legal mediation, she said. That's what he told me. Unia, Cashin said, his voice low. Not now. She shook her head. No. Because I'm not going down with you. The round-faced officer turned back to the 4 men. IDs. Now. Reluctantly, wallets came out. Plastic cards hit the table. The names didn't match the ones on the supposed legal documents. One ID was from Arizona, another from New Mexico. Stage names, the officer asked dryly. Halvorsen or Harrison or whoever, grimaced. Were independent contractors. He said it was a role play for a family intervention. Paid us $500 each. Told us it was for a YouTube channel. Cashin slammed his palm on the table. I didn't say YouTube. Yes, you did, said another of the actors, the one with the deep-set eyes. And you said no one would get hurt. This, he gestured at the officers, wasn't part of the job description. My father finally spoke, his voice low but carrying. Cashin. Is any of this true? Cashin's eyes darted around the room like he was looking for an exit that wasn't there. It's exaggerated. Exaggerated. My mother's voice cracked on the word. You brought strangers into this to lie to your own cousin? To us. It's not like that. It's exactly like that, I said, my voice calm in a way that made him flinch. You planned this. The dinner, the documents, the fake lawyers. You thought if you put me in a room with enough pressure I'd cave. You were supposed to, he shot back. You've always caved before. The lead officer straightened. Mr. Hargrove, stand up. Cashin blinked. What? You're being detained on suspicion of attempted fraud, conspiracy, and impersonation of legal professionals. We'll sort the charges at the station. The scrape of his chair was louder than it needed to be. This is ridiculous. Meredith, tell them we can work this out. I didn't answer. He tried again, louder. You really want to send your own cousin to jail? Over what? A misunderstanding. Catherine answered for me. Over a calculated attempt to steal her inheritance. The cuffs clicked shut, metallic and final. As Cashin was led toward the door, he turned once more to look at me. The charm was gone, the confidence gone. All that was left was a sharp, bitter edge. This isn't over, he said. But it was. Because the moment the door closed behind him, the room exhaled. The actors slumped in their chairs, already bargaining for leniency. My parents stared at the table like it might give them a script. Me. I finally sat down. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I'd won something tonight I hadn't realized I was still fighting for. My right to stand my ground. The news about what happened at the Bellwether didn't stay in that private dining room for long. By Monday morning, Cashin's arrest was already in the Denver Post's crime blotter. Local man charged with attempted fraud, conspiracy. Accused of hiring actors to impersonate attorneys in inheritance scheme. No names beyond his, but in our circles, it didn't take much for people to connect the dots. The Hargrove family group chat imploded before breakfast. Aunt Mara sent a single shaky typed message to everyone. Please do not contact Cashin until we have legal advice. Within the hour, half the cousins had called me anyway, some to get the story, some to give unsolicited advice on keeping this in the family. But this was already out of the family's hands. Catherine took point immediately. She coordinated with the district attorney's office, shared the recordings I'd managed to capture on my phone, and made sure the actors, now confirmed as freelancers from an online gig platform, were cooperative. They'd been duped too, and once they realized the seriousness of what Cashin had involved them in, they turned over their contracts, payment receipts, and text exchanges. One text from Cashin to Halvorsen at the start of the job read, "We need her to feel like this is real. Push hard. She'll crack if you make it sound official enough." Seeing that in black and white stripped away any leftover doubt I might have harbored. This hadn't been desperation. It hadn't been a lapse in judgment. It was deliberate, calculated. The preliminary hearing came 2 weeks later. Cashin showed up in a dark suit that didn't quite fit, the same smirk he'd worn at every family wedding plastered on his face like a dare. His attorney, a real one this time, argued that it was all a misguided attempt at reconciliation and family role-play gone too far. The judge didn't buy it. The DA outlined the charges: attempted fraud, conspiracy, impersonation of legal professionals, and use of forged documents. Each count carried its own potential sentence. They also presented the clause in Aunt Eleanor's trust, the one I'd read and photographed that night at home. It was airtight. His attempt to coerce me into relinquishing control of my trust meant forfeiting his remaining share, effective immediately. Cashin's face barely moved when he heard that. Maybe he'd already guessed. Or maybe he thought he'd find a way to charm the outcome. My parents sat on the other side of the courtroom. My mother wouldn't look at me. My father gave me a small, weary nod. I returned it. That was all we had left for now. After the hearing, Catherine walked me out into the bright, cold sunlight. "He's going to push for a plea," she said. "Given the evidence, he won't want to risk a full trial. What happens if he takes it? He'll still serve time. Probably a few years. And restitution, though I doubt you'll see a cent of it. But more importantly, the forfeiture stands. He's out of the trust for good. The relief I felt wasn't joy. It was something quieter, heavier, like setting down a bag you didn't realize you'd been carrying for miles. 3 months later, Cashin took the plea. 3 years in state prison plus probation. His real estate license was revoked before he even saw the inside of his cell. Unia broke off the engagement the week the plea deal went through. I heard she mailed the ring back to his apartment along with a note that simply said, "Don't call me." My parents tried, briefly, to spin it as a tragedy of circumstance. But as more details surfaced, the shell company filings, the recruitment of the actors, the forged documents, they ran out of ways to soften it. Eventually they stopped bringing him up at all. The Bellwether's private dining room still comes up in my mind sometimes, unbidden. The smell of polished wood and expensive cologne, the way those stacks of paper sat like silent threats. The moment Catherine walked in and the whole room shifted. I kept the copy of Aunt Eleanor's letter framed on my desk now, under glass. Not as a warning, though it served that purpose, but as proof that she'd known the truth about people long before I did. She'd left me the tools to protect myself, even if she couldn't be here to see me use them. The last time I saw Cashin was at sentencing. He didn't look at me. I didn't speak to him. But as the bailiff led him away in cuffs, I realized something. He hadn't just underestimated the law. He'd underestimated me. And that was the last mistake he'd get to make at my expense. 6 months after Cashin's sentencing, my life had settled into something that almost resembled normal. Not the old normal, too much had shifted for that, but a quieter, sturdier version. High Lark Labs had wrapped the Mesa Ridge project ahead of schedule, and the client sent us a handwritten thank you note along with an absurd amount of artisanal chocolate. I'd moved my office plants to the windowsill so they could catch the afternoon light. Naomi and I had an unspoken rule. Neither of us mentioned Cashin unless the conversation was about the design flaws of the Bellwether's private dining chairs. The trust account sat untouched except for one deliberate withdrawal. In April, I used part of Aunt Eleanor's bequest to establish the Eleanor Navarro Scholarship Fund, a program for women pursuing degrees in law and public policy at the University of New Mexico. It felt right. Eleanor had spent her life teaching kids to stand their ground. This was a way to keep that lesson moving forward. The first scholarship recipient, a 27-year-old single mom named Lila, sent me a letter after receiving her award. She wrote about working nights at a diner while studying for the LSAT, about wanting to become a public defender so people like her neighbors, people without the money for real representation, wouldn't be left defenseless. Reading her words, I thought of the night at the Bellwether, of those 4 men in suits trying to bluff their way into legitimacy, and of Catherine walking in with the kind of authority you can't fake. I thought of how quickly control can be taken from you, if you let someone else write the script. Cashin was still in prison. I didn't write to him. He didn't write to me. I heard from Unia once, a short email thanking me without quite saying for what, and letting me know she'd moved to Oregon to start over. I wished her well. My parents visited him occasionally. They didn't tell me when they went and I didn't ask. Whatever bridge lay between us now, it was narrow and fragile, and I had no desire to test its weight. One Friday evening Naomi and I sat at a neighborhood bar, sipping drinks under the soft hum of low conversation. "You ever think about how close that was?" she asked. I knew what she meant. Closer than I want to. She tipped her glass toward me. But not close enough to win. We clinked glasses. On the walk home the air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. I thought about the night Cashin called, about the way his voice had shifted from pleading to cold in a heartbeat. I thought about how easy it would have been to say yes, just to keep the peace, just to avoid the fight. But peace built on surrender isn't peace. It's just silence before the next demand. Sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting or punishing or making sure everyone knows you were right. Sometimes the best revenge is being exactly who they didn't count on you to be. Prepared, unafraid, unmovable. That night at the Bellwether, Cashin had confused my kindness for weakness. And he learned the hard way that those are not the same thing. The last time I saw the Bellwether's private dining room was from the street. I was walking to meet Naomi for dinner a few blocks away, and my path happened to pass its tall, curtained windows. The lights inside were warm and I could see silhouettes at the long table, laughing, leaning in, clinking glasses. A scene from a life I might have had if that night had gone differently. I stopped for just a moment, not to dwell, but to mark the spot where I'd decided that no one, family or otherwise, would ever corner me again. Then I kept walking. Some doors you close gently. Some you lock and never look back. This one I welded shut.